Hello, viewer, and welcome to Worldview, a program designed to bring you up to speed with trending developments the world over. My name is Xavier Robert, reaching you live from Uyo, the Akwa Ibom State capital. And on our top stories we're tracking for you today, United States President Joe Biden says aid to Ukraine will keep flowing for now, as he seeks to reassure allies of continued support for the war effort. Donald Trump arrives court in Lower Manhattan, describes fraud case as sham. At least 10 people reported killed as roof of church collapse in northern Mexico. Details of these stories and more, just in a moment. First on Worldview today, United States President Joe Biden says aid to Ukraine will keep flowing for now as he seeks to reassure allies of continued support for the war effort. But the president said time is running out on Sunday in a warning to Congress, which has voted to avert a government shutdown by passing a short-term funding package that dropped assistance for Ukraine in the fight against Russia. Biden urged the Congress to negotiate an aid package as soon as possible. Despite Biden's attempts to reassure Kiev, the future of U.S. aid for Ukraine hangs in the balance after a last-gasp deal to avoid a government shutdown.
We want to assure our American allies and the American people and the people of Ukraine that you can count on our support. We will not walk away. The vast majority of both parties, I'll say it again, Democrats and Republicans, Senate and House, support helping Ukraine and the brutal aggression that's being thrust upon them by Russia. Stop playing games. Get this done. This agreement today, while averting an immediate crisis, ends in, I guess it's 45 days now. It's already moving down, just before Thanksgiving. Quite frankly, I'm sick and tired.
Meanwhile, the Populist Party of former Prime Minister Robert Fico that wants to stop military aid to Ukraine and is critical of the European Union and NATO has won Slovakia's election. Results showed on Sunday. SMER-SSD party scored 23.3%, beating the centrist progressive Slovakia PS that garnered 17% of the votes. The Slovak Statistics Office said early on Sunday after completing the count of 99.98% of the vote from some 6,000 polling stations. Saturday's vote was a test for the small Eastern European country's support for neighboring Ukraine in its war with Russia. The 59-year-old Fico has promised that Slovakia, one of Europe's biggest donors to Ukraine as a share of its gross domestic product GDP, will not send a single round of ammunition to Ukraine and has called for better relations with Russia. The country of 5.5 million people, created in 1993 following the breakup of Czechoslovakia, has been a staunch supporter of Ukraine since Russia invaded last February, donating arms and opening the borders for refugees fleeing the war. Away from that now, Donald Trump has arrived at a court in Lower Manhattan. Trump faces a civil fraud trial which threatens to handicap his business empire. The trial is being held over the next weeks at the New York Supreme Court on 60 Center Street. In brief remarks before entering the courtroom, Trump told the media that it is a scam and it is a sham. In her reported speech, he said, "Just so you know, my financial statements are phenomenal." Close quote. In a separate development, at least 10 people, including 3 children, were killed when the roof of a church collapsed in northern Mexico. The collapse happened on Sunday afternoon, local time, as around 100 people were attending a baptism of Santa Cruz Church in Ciudad Madero. 60 people were injured, at least 2 of them seriously, and dozens were trapped underneath the rubble. Local residents rushed to the building with shovels and pickaxes to try to free those trapped. The search and rescue teams have since arrived at the scene, and 2 cranes are on site to remove the debris. In a separate development, Spain's Energy Minister Teresa Ribera has warned that talks at the COP28 climate summit will be challenging, as she opened a gathering of energy ministers and climate leaders from around the world in Madrid. Spain, which holds the rotating presidency of the European Council, is pushing for an international coalition to back the 2015 Paris deal's target to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, above pre-industrial levels. At the COP28 conference, countries will assess how efforts to tackle climate change are falling short of the Paris Agreement goal and discuss plans to get on track. There are 5 conditions for the upcoming summit to be considered successful, the International Energy Agency chief Fateh Birol said. These include tripling global capital expenditure on renewables, doubling of energy efficiency improvements, and an agreement on mechanisms to support clean energy financing in emerging countries. He added that global coal, oil, and natural gas consumption may peak before 2030. In a separate development, the Indonesian families of those who died in the Kanjuruhan Stadium disaster in Malang a year ago have marked the anniversary of the tragedy along with hundreds of fans and survivors at a candlelit vigil at the stadium amid renewed calls for justice. About 300 people traveled by convoy from the center of Malang to Kanjuruhan Stadium, with some venturing inside for the first time since last year's disaster, when 135 people were killed, including children as young as 3 years old. Rini Hanifa, however, could not bring herself to enter the place where her 20-year-old son, Agus Ran Sa Pratama Putra, had died. The prayer vigil started at about 12 p.m. on Sunday and carried on late into the night. The sense of injustice was palpable, as parts of the stadium, now in the process of being rebuilt to FIFA specifications, were set alight and flames blazed across the pitch. For Hanifa, however, the experience of being at Kanjuruhan was overwhelming, and she had to leave and go home early. Now, elsewhere, early voting began in parts of Australia for a landmark referendum on creating an indigenous body that can advise Parliament on matters affecting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. People eligible for early voting in the Northern Territory, Tasmania, Victoria and Western Australia will be able to cast their ballots from Monday, while voters in New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia and the Australian Capital Territory will be able to do so from Tuesday. The referendum itself is scheduled for October 14, and voting is compulsory. As early voting began, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese hit the streets of Melbourne, the capital of Victoria, to rally support for the yes vote. Moving on now to the United Kingdom, where the country has awarded 3 UK companies a £4 billion contract to design and manufacture a nuclear-powered attack submarine as part of the country's AUKUS program with Australia and the United States. The UK Ministry of Defence, in a statement on Sunday, said the contract will be Systems, Rolls-Royce and Babcock represents a significant milestone for both the UK and the trilateral AUKUS program as a whole. The new submarines, known as SSN AUKUS, will be the largest, most advanced and most powerful attack submarines ever operated by the Royal Navy and will combine world-leading sensors, design and weaponry in one vessel, according to reports. The first of the submarines will be delivered into service in the UK in the late 2030s, and the first Australian ones will follow in the early 2040s. The plans for SSN AUKUS were unveiled in March by the leaders of Australia, the UK and US, and came as the 3 countries ramp up their efforts to counter China in the Asia-Pacific region. Moving on now, at least 13 people have been killed in a fire in a Spanish nightclub, according to authorities, with fears the toll could still rise as rescue workers sift through the debris. The fire ripped through adjoining nightclubs in Murcia in southeast Spain on Sunday. Emergency services reported so, adding that rescuers were still searching for people unaccounted for after the blaze. Emergency services posted on X, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, that firefighters were continuing to work at the scene and had not ruled out the possibility of finding more victims. Jose Ballester, mayor of Murcia, said the fire had broken out at around 6 a.m. local time and was extremely serious. Ballester told reporters at the scene that there are still bodies to be pulled out from the rubble, which he said was a complicated task given the risk of collapse. Diego Serral of Spain's National Police told reporters that dead were found in the Fonda nightclub, one of 3 adjoining clubs which had sustained the majority of fire damage, including the collapse of its roof. Elsewhere, Serbia has denied reports of a military build-up along the border with Kosovo, alleging a campaign of lies against his country in the wake of a shootout a week earlier that killed 4 people and fueled tensions in the volatile Balkan region. Earlier this week, the United States urged Belgrade to pull its forces back from the border with Kosovo after detecting what it called an unprecedented Serbian military buildup. Serbia deployed sophisticated tanks and artillery on the border after deadly clashes erupted at a monastery in northern Kosovo last week, the White House warned. The European Union also expressed similar concerns, and Kosovo's government on Saturday said it was monitoring the movements of the Serbian military from 3 different directions. It also urged Serbia to immediately pull back its troops and demilitarize the border area. Clashes last week erupted when heavily armed Serb gunmen ambushed a patrol a few miles from the Serbian border, killing a Kosovo police officer. Several dozen assailants then barricaded themselves in an Orthodox monastery, sparking an hour-long firefight in which 3 gunmen were killed and 3 were arrested. Elsewhere, the embassy of Afghanistan in India, which owed its allegiance to the former West-backed government, has announced its closure, saying it would cease operations starting from October 1. The Afghan embassy's statement on Saturday said it wanted to reach an agreement with the Indian government to ensure that the interests of Afghans living, working, studying, and doing business in India are safeguarded. Afghans account for around 1/3 of the nearly 40,000 refugees registered in India, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency, but that figure excludes those who are not registered with the UN. After the break, Mohamed Muizzu wins presidential election in Maldives after second round runoff against incumbent Ibrahim Mohamed Soleh. To stay with us for details on this story and more right after the break.
Spectrum TV, broadening your horizon.
Business exists only to meet the needs of the people, but there's an extra advantage if your product and services are pitched on a platform that gives you the added advantage over your competitors. For your desired return on investment and so much more, advertise on Spectrum Television, on StarTime's DTH Channel 421 and on free-to-air with a frequency of 12733. Spectrum Television, broadening your horizon.
Glad to know you're still with us. Now, moving on, Gabon's new leader held talks with Congo president aimed at improving ties between the countries. Gabon's leader Oligui said that his visit was aimed at improving the ties and easing Gabon's international isolation as well as sanctions following the coup. Recall that Gabon was suspended from the African Union and the Economic Community of Central Africa States, ECOWAS, after the change of government, and ECOWAS had also ordered the immediate transfer of its headquarters from Gabon's Libreville to the Equatorial Guinea capital Malabo. The Congo president did not address reporters after the talks, but his foreign minister Jean-Claude Gakoso hailed Oligui as a man of humility and reconciliation. Elsewhere, a huge fire at a police complex in Egypt has injured at least 38 people. According to reports, firefighters managed to contain the blaze at the facility in Ismailia, and local hospitals have been placed on alert. The cause of the fire is unknown, and the government has not commented. However, civil defense sources said that the fire caused parts of the headquarters of the Directorate of Security to collapse. Meanwhile, Egypt's health ministry has sent 50 ambulances and 2 military aircraft to the building, with at least 24 people being treated for asphyxiation, along with 2 for burns. Moving on now, a suicide bomber has detonated an explosive device in front of the ministry building in the Turkish capital Ankara, wounding 2 police officers, according to the country's interior minister. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said on Sunday that the terrorists will never achieve their aims, a few hours after an attack near the country's parliament in Ankara. Interior Minister Ali Yerlikaya said 2 attackers were responsible for the explosions in front of the Ministry of Interior building. One of them blew himself and the other was neutralized, according to the minister. The blast was followed by gunfire outside the Ministry of Interior and Parliament buildings. There have also been reports of a rocket being launched. In a separate development, an ethnic Armenian exodus has nearly emptied Nagorno-Karabakh of residents since Azerbaijan attacked and ordered the breakaway region's fighter groups to disarm. The Armenian government made this known. Nazeli Badassaryan, the press secretary to Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, said on Saturday that 100,417 people had arrived in Armenia from Nagorno-Karabakh, which had a population of approximately 120,000 before Azerbaijan reclaimed the region in a lightning offensive last week. A total of 21,043 vehicles have crossed the Hakkari Bridge, which links Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh since last week. Now, Bagdasaryan said some lined up for days because the winding mountain road that is the only route to Armenia became jammed. On a political story we have for you, Mohamed Muizzu has won the presidential election in the Maldives after a second-round runoff against incumbent Ibrahim Mohamed Solih, which was seen as a test of the Indian Ocean archipelago's nascent democracy as well as its ties with China and traditional benefactor India. Muizzu, aged 45, leads a party that welcomed an influx of Chinese loans and oversaw a wide-ranging crackdown on dissent when it was last in power. Incumbent Ibrahim Mohamed Solih conceded defeat shortly before midnight after the Elections Commission of the Maldives said Muizzu had won 54.06% of the vote in the runoff contest. Solih, aged 61, will remain as caretaker president until his successor's inauguration on November 17. Muizzu emerged as the surprise frontrunner during the first round of voting on September 8, taking some 46% of the ballots cast. Solih, hurt by a low voter turnout and a split within his Maldivian Democratic Party MDP, won 39%. The runoff was seen as having significant implications for the Maldives' foreign policy, especially in deciding China and India's battle for influence in the strategically located country. The Nobel Prize The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine has been awarded to a pair of scientists who developed the technology that led to the mRNA COVID vaccines. Professors Katalin Kariko and Drew Weissman will share the prize. The technology was experimental before the pandemic, but has now been given to millions of people around the world to protect them against serious COVID-19. The same mRNA technology is now being researched for other diseases, including cancer. The Nobel Prize Committee said the laureates contributed to the unprecedented rate of vaccine development during one of the greatest threats to human health in modern times. Both were told they had won by telephone this morning and were said to be overwhelmed. More than 300 people are seeking compensation for being sexually abused by Japan's top talent agent, the late Johnny Kitagawa, his agency says. Allegations against Kitagawa, who died in 2019, came into prominence again after a BBC documentary inspired more victims to come forward. In September, an independent inquiry concluded that the music mogul had abused hundreds of boys and young men over a 6-decade career. It also urged compensation for victims. The Journey and Associates agency on Monday revealed 478 people had responded to a website it had set up for recompense, 325 of whom were seeking compensation as victims. The agency said 150 of these people were former talents. And finally, on Worldview Today, Tom Hanks has warned an advert that appears to be fronted by him is in fact an artificial intelligence AI fake. Hanks has previously spoken about the artistic challenge that AI poses his industry, and the issue has been central to recent strikes by high-profile Hollywood actors and writers. As AI systems have grown in power and sophistication, so have concerns about their ability to create ever more realistic virtual versions of people, of real people, what are sometimes called deep fakes. A number of celebrities, including the consumer financial expert Martin Lewis, have had their likenesses used in deep fakes, which are often used to scam people. The use of deep fakes in pornography, sometimes used as a form of revenge, prompted the government to toughen the law in England and Wales to make it easier to prosecute offenders. Faked AI images and videos of politicians are also exacerbating the problem of online misinformation. A former president, US President Donald Trump, and the current leader of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, are among those who have been targeted. In September, Google announced it would require any political adverts that ran on its platform to disclose if they had been created with AI. AI video manipulation can also be used in non-controversial ways. For example, the pioneering virtual concerts featuring the band ABBA. The possibility of AI being used to extend the careers of performing artists was one Hanks discussed when he appeared on the Adam Buxton podcast in May. And with that, we wrap up our package for you on Worldview Today. Do ensure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which you can find on our website, spectrumtv.ng. My name is Xavier Robert. Do have a beautiful evening. Bye for now.